Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Kitchen Conversations. We've got a small agenda. With each episode, what we're hoping is that one person who's never played the game will pick up a paddle and give it a go for the very first time. And we're pretty confident today's guest will inspire that and more. We had a chance to sit down with one of the most colorful characters in the game today. He goes by the nickname Sleeves. He'll explain what that's all about in the episode. And you'll hear about his podcast, Senior Pickleball Report. You'll hear about him voicing movies. You'll hear about all the things that he's involved in, including his new organization and all the paddle reviews and more that he does to help benefit the game that we all love. We think you're going to love meeting Sleeves, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Kitchen Conversations. Well, Sleeves, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to my little podcast called Kitchen Conversations. And I really just want to start by thanking you for putting a bit of time aside for us today and give me a chance to say hello and finally meet. It's been a fun few weeks. Yeah.
Nice to meet you as well, virtually, obviously, but hopefully someday.
Sure.
I always get, when I talk to people, I'm like, hopefully someday we run into each other on the courts because that's kind of where all the fun is.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to ask you an interesting starting question. I asked this of Steve Peranto, of course, the Hall of Famer. I had a chance to talk to Steve about a week ago, and I feel the same with you. I've been following you online for a bit now and diving into your content and a lot of the podcast interviews like this that you've already done. And so when I meet you, there's this instant sense that I know you, and yet you've never seen my face. So it's this interesting relationship that you must have with your audience and with people like me that beg you to come on their show, and you're generous enough to do that. And so thank you. But do you find that at all a bit difficult, fascinating, interesting, concerning? I mean, where does that land for you in that moment? Because I just feel like I know you.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you finally meet some people in person. If you do this long enough, you will. You'll run across them at some tournament somewhere, and the expectation is that like, yeah, we're old buddies, and really we've only spent a short amount of time with one another, and we've sort of like I do and you do as well. You research their background, and you think you get to know them, and you get a thumbnail sketch of what they are in one particular avenue of their life. So I actually really look forward to meeting the folks in person. And I always say that in my pickleball interviews, even if it's not on air, I talk to them afterwards. I'm like, where are you going to be this year? And maybe we'll cross paths. You go into this, you go into that, because there's obviously tournaments and there's, events like PickleCon and things like that that people attend. And I always think that's the kind of the fun of this is that I've interviewed, hundreds of people and reviewed hundreds of paddles, but I want to meet the folks behind it in person and hopefully on a court so we can have some fun, and because that's why we're all doing this. So
Yeah, great. That's good stuff. And I think the other thing that you've got going for you is and I say this with the utmost respect, you are a guy that once someone meets you, they're just not going to forget you. You have a very unique look to you. It's striking, tall, handsome, all that kind of stuff. But even the nickname Sleeves, I mean, you put the combination of just sort of your physical presence and your outward personality in combination with Sleeves. I mean, you're just a hard guy to forget. So I would think that even people that haven't necessarily been part of your podcast world that have just been following you, if they bump into you at a tournament or a clinic or see you out somewhere, I'm sure they feel this immediate, relationship with you, which must be kind of neat.
yeah, it is fascinating because part of this is branding. When I started my channel, I was like, well, I'm going to cover seniors since I'm a senior player. And I'm like, Mike's Senior Pickleball Report just doesn't roll off the tongue. I've been called Sleeves my whole life. My last name is pronounced Sliwa, and so Sleeves just came in very early in my life in different variations of it. It was plural, and then it was singular, then it's back to plural, and then the the AI sort of logo design it helps a little bit for recognition too. And I have been told by people who have worked in um, um, particular industries that really rely heavily on branding that it was a genius move, but it was just pure luck because I'm like my last name just sort of rolled with it, and that was my intention. It just sounded better than
I
Mike,
get you. Yeah.
um, and so people. It's weird. People like to call me Sleeves, and so they ask all the time. Like when I was, sort of being auditioned for the film, which we'll probably talk about. They kept asking, "Can we call you Sleeves? Can
Right.
we call you Sleeves?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's fine." It's weird because generally a lot of my friends and family, mainly friends from college, high school, so on, those are the ones. That's where I got the
Hmm.
name, and so when I started to hear it outside of that, it was a little strange at first, but I've gotten used to it so much. I don't think there's a fair amount of people I interact with that probably don't even know my first
Yeah, I
name.
would
So
agree. I think I bumped into you as Sleeves, and then later learned that we shared the first name as Mike. But well, I think you got the better end of the stick, to be quite honest, because my last name is Spees, which in high school became Spaz. I mean, how could it not? How does Spees not?
yeah, well, mine was Sliwa, which became
Oh my.
Saliva.
Okay,
So
I take that back. Maybe you did get the raw end of the stick.
I
Okay,
feel
I'm
you.
sorry. Yeah, kids can be so creative and so boring all at the same time. So,
Yeah,
yeah, well, that's great. Well, listen, when I reached out to you, Sleeves, I reached out with what I thought were some intelligent podcast questions, and I think there was some merit to some of that. But the more I spent looking at my own questions, thinking about you, thinking about the legacy that you've already created within the space of podcasting in the game that you and I love, I got a little nervous about those questions. And I just didn't want to come and spend a bit of time with you today asking you questions that I think, frankly, you've answered 100 times or more. You were kind to respond, which I really appreciated, told me my questions were fine. But then you offered some insight into some of the things that are happening maybe in your life that haven't been covered quite as much in a podcast. And so, if you don't mind, I'd like to just park my questions because I don't think there's anything new there that you're going to hear. I'm going to necessarily hear, the listeners are. And I'd like to kind of jump into the comments that you sent back, if that's okay with you.
that's great. Yeah, no, your questions are great. I just thought, there's some detail that not everybody gets because things happen in real time, and some of that information is not available online quite yet, or it's hard to find. So I thought, well, here's some stuff you can
Yeah,
play
it's
with if you want.
perfect, and I appreciate it. So, why don't we jump into that? And then, I do have a couple of pickleball specific questions before I let you go today that I'm interested in
Yeah,
your insight on, both as a player and a commentator and an influencer, and I guess as much a storyteller as anything. So, I'll get to those just before we wrap up. But you did mention that you're involved in a documentary called Dream Breaker. Walk me through that story. And it's on Roku now, and you've narrated that. Is that the story?
yeah. So I might started my channel in 2022, and that was February 2022. And by June of 2022, I was contacted by the woman who ended up directing and helping produce the film and create the film, and it was Ashley Underwood, who is actually married to Larry David. Um, I didn't know that at the time when she was speaking to me, and she's, I think she was going through her list of people that she may want in her film, and she was still was going to be able. She knew it was going to be about the pro scene and kind of the birth of the pro game, and just talking to different creators, content creators, influencers, so on, players. So that was June, and she said, "Yeah, I think I'd love to have you in the movie." I mean, obviously the Yurt thing's pretty cool. Didn't really know that was a thing you were doing, so that kind of adds an element. And then, you know, like movies do, they, we'll get back to you. And so, sort of December rolls around, late November, December of that same year, and I'm like, well, I wonder how the movie's going. Clearly, I'm not in it, which, whatever, it's fine. I got a number here. I'm gonna contact Ashley and see if I can interview her, talk to her about the film, and promote it in some way. And I wrote her, and she said, "Hey, can you jump on a call tomorrow with my team? I'd like to talk to you about the film and being in the film and stuff." I'm like, well, sure, great. And so at that point, give you a little update here. I am finally on what I would call real Wi-Fi. For the first 4 years of my channel, I basically, was taking borrowing my neighbor's Wi-Fi, the one bar, and so I couldn't really do anything in here that was interview-wise significant because I just didn't have the power to keep a video going. It would cut in and out, and the audio would cut in and out. And so I finally got Starlink, had to bite the bullet, and finally got it. And I could do things like this. But I rolled the dice that day because once in a while it works. And I'm like, if I want to get in this film, they're going to have to see the yurt. And so I was sitting right here just like this, and I turned the camera on, and they had, a couple producers and her, and they go, "Is that
Yeah.
the yurt?"
Is that it?
And I said, "Yeah." And so
Yeah.
I pulled it off and I showed them the yurt, and they're like, "Ooh!" And at that point, I'm like, I think I
Yeah.
might have a chance of getting in this film. A bunch of questions later about what I knew mainly about the pro game, and they said, "Well, Mike, we're thinking of having you narrate the film," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, like me? What? I've been doing this 4 months. Um, are you sure?" And then they said, "Well, we're going to talk about it." Da, 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 da. And that evening, they got back to me and said, "Yeah, I think what we're going to do is we're going to have you basically." We have a small budget, so what we're going to do is try this out for a while. We'll send you a cell phone, and we want you to do video diaries of different themes and topics we send you, with potentially putting them in the film, kind of to carry the story along. And so I did that for about 5 months. where I had to drive to the top of a hill to have enough Wi-Fi to upload the 4K that they required in every video I did. Which, if I when I just started to do it here, it was every minute I recorded was an hour to upload, and then I would
Wow.
get upload
Yeah.
failed. So that was kind of the process of getting into the film and getting going
Wow.
on it.
Yeah, it's never easy. You're getting into something in the technology. You know what you're doing, and you're comfortable with that part of it. But yeah, there's nothing worse than watching that wheel
Yeah,
spin and spin and spin, and finally decide, no, it's not going to work. Yeah, it's crazy.
right. And then eventually they decided that it was enough, and they're like, "I think we're going to use you in the film, so we're going to come out and we're going to actually film you saying some of the things you already recorded, but on our cameras, on our high quality Sony cameras, not the cell phone we sent you." So they came out in September of 2023, I believe, for 2 days, 8-hour days. And I live in the middle of nowhere. You have to drive. The closest airport to really fly into is either like Tucson or El Paso. So I believe they flew into El Paso or Tucson, got some crew help from the state that, people doing sound and stuff. Had a crew of about six came here and they shot for 2 days. And yeah, so I'm in the movie off and on every 10, 15 minutes, sort of catch people up about what the heck's happening on because there's all these talking heads and all these acronyms. So they'll shoot me, chopping some wood and saying, "Hey, here's what's going on." So that's kind
What
of how
an
it turned out.
interesting approach to it, though. Really, Mike, like to come at it from that
Yeah.
angle to sort of have you pop in, pop out, pop in, pop out. Kind of a neat thing. Was that an experience that if you had the chance to
Yeah.
do it again today, would you do it again? Would you take another chance at something like that? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I would. It's interesting enough. I'm actually going to be in another film that's going to come out in about a year from now, which is a similar role that I have. It's a little different. It's actually, I'm interviewing the director, and
Okay.
he's talking about making the film. And so I think so. Yeah, I didn't actually know why I was in the film. Even when it came out, I watched the film, and my wife and I
Hmm.
were like, we were both a bunch of people, our friends, and we're like, "Why am I in this movie?" And my buddy, who has been in the film industry for a long time, and his father's
Okay.
pretty famous, he leans in. He goes, "Mike, you're the
Oh,
ginger. There's all this
yeah.
money and talking heads and billionaires, and they got to cut to you once in a while to sort of bring reality
Yeah.
back in because otherwise people just sort of go, I don't know what the heck's going on. There's all these people trying to throw money at this sport." And so then it made a little more sense to me because I literally watched. It, I was like, it did come down to that. She actually showed the director or the executives that were going to buy the film, like, should we have sleeves in it? Here's what it looks like with sleeves. Here's what it looks like
Okay.
without. And so they chose the version that I was in.
Wow,
So
what an experience. Yeah. It's funny how our life
yeah,
goes, isn't it? I mean, you
yeah.
start off in one sort of down one pathway and that leads to another.
Oh
Yeah, I'm a
gosh,
big fan right now of looking at
yeah,
my life today and maybe at some point looking at certain decisions I made that were maybe insignificant in that moment, but certainly led to great things down the road. And yeah, for you to have started the podcast and gotten involved and lent your voice to it, I mean, the connections from that just sort of start rolling. Yeah. So after that project, what was next?
well, I mean, there's the thing. So I'm like, well, what is this going to do? Is this going to bring? What this ultimately did for me is it brought me into a place where some of the people that were involved with the pro game knew who I was. Um, with prior to that, that wasn't the case, and that can be good and bad. I don't think the people that were generally the movie was about were exactly huge fans of it, because the film was really about the power struggle of who was going to control pro pickleball. It was really a fight between two billionaires, Steve Kuhn and Tom Dundon, and one guy owned one property, one piece of the landscape, Major League Pickleball. The other guy owned the PPA, and it was kind of this battle for the players and what it was about. And I don't know if the film. I think the film did a pretty good job trying to kind of just maintain, just documenting it. But people say things and they look at themselves on camera and they're like, "Yeah, maybe I didn't look like I didn't put myself in the best light." So I think some of the folks weren't exactly happy with how they might have been portrayed. But the way I sort of looked at it, it was, didn't change the wording. You came out and you said these things, and it is what it is. And so I got a little bit of like, oh, you know, who's this guy? And I have been very critical. I'm going to be upfront. I've been very critical post movie about how pro pickleball has been handled, and I am not a fan of what I would call the current status quo about how it's going. And so once they knew who I was, once I started making a little pushback on some of the decision making. Um, let's just say we're not friends.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay. Yeah.
Um, you know, they have a lot of money, they're doing their thing, and I'm this guy living in the middle of nowhere spouting off my mouth. So,
Yeah.
but I have some ideas, and we can talk about some of those ideas of what I'm trying to do about changing kind of the status quo of, in the way pickleball is kind of perceived.
Okay. Well,
So
let's come back to the hat for sure on that. Absolutely. So, Mike, the movie gets kind of wrapped up. It is what it is, and it's hit where it's hit, and it's a miss where it's a miss, I
yeah,
suppose, like most. And but were you happy with the end result of that? And then ultimately, where does that lead into the next project for you?
yeah, yeah, it was. I think the filmmakers did a great job. It was not easy, a lot of moving parts, and the problem was the story changed every week, and so they were really looking like, where do we end this thing? And it's sort of happened for them. They got sort of lucky where this sort of tour war came to an end, and right at the end of their film, because they came out to me and they wanted to wrap up, and they're like, "Boy, it's just hanging here. We don't know what's going to happen." And then it kind of just resolved itself, and they kind of put a bow on it. So I think it would have been an easier thing to make a series about this, but ultimately that's not the project they were given uh, funding for. So they made what they did, and I think they did a fantastic job. Um, for me, rolling out of that, I sort of knew that I could continue to just do this, make paddle
Mhm.
reviews, interview people, and that's great. And because I have done that, I have made a lot of
Yeah.
contacts and a lot of connections and a lot of networking. And so I thought, well, what can I do with this? And really, I've kind of gravitated towards those people who are looking to change the space. And so I'm really working with a couple entities. One of them is challenging the status quo as far as pickleball ratings is
Yeah.
concerned. And the other one is the HAT, which is Pickleball Manufacturers Association, which is really just giving creators, tournament directors, players, brand influencers, people who have brands, whether they're paddle brands, apparel brands, eyeglass, you name it, a space where they can collaborate with one another. Because what I'm seeing out there is a lot of sort of the narrative being dominated by a few large brands and a few large organizations. And there's
Mhm.
hundreds and hundreds and
Yeah.
hundreds of paddle
Yeah.
companies, hundreds of apparel companies, tons of apps that really don't have a space. And so I started working with some guys who developed Pickleball Manufacturers Association, which is a trade organization where we can just collaborate. And collaboration can be as simple as like, Mike, I'm going to share your stuff, and I'm
Right.
going to tag you, and I'm going to tag my
Yeah.
friends. Or it can be like, hey, I'm an apparel company and I want to do a collaboration with a paddle company. We create a project together. But it doesn't have to cost money. And I think it's a way for people to connect that may be trying to wade their way through um, sort of the chaotic pickleball landscape as far as retail goes and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. The marketing money behind so many of these organizations, and the interpretation that we have as fans and players of whatever it is we're involved in. In this instant, it's pickleball, but you just wonder how much of that
Yeah.
kind of it just moves us in a direction that maybe if we knew otherwise, we may not go that direction. I've got a couple of small Canadian paddle manufacturers here that I'm going to be talking to in the next few months, and that's one of the battles that they're facing right now. Is one of them is called
Yeah,
Combat,
for sure.
Combat Paddles. And Michael, the owner and the founder, is just one of the most passionate people you'll ever meet. But he's up against, a dragon, in Selkirk and others. And so,
Yeah.
how does he carve out a niche market, Mike? And how does he find an audience? And how does he deliver his value proposition? He really believes in this paddle. I mean, yeah, he's in it for,
Yeah.
profit. Clearly, he's a company, he's a business. He needs to keep the lights and heat and the hydro on. But the passion behind him, is it's unmistakable. So yeah, it's an interesting point. So fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, that's the part. I mean, I review paddles. I don't review the big paddle companies don't send me stuff. I don't have the viewership for it. I get everybody else, which is great because it's endless. But the big challenge for these companies is the cost to get something certified. And that's kind of what PMA really started with is like, if you got to spend tens of thousands of dollars just to get one model of your paddle certified to be used in a, let's just say, for example, USAPA pickleball event, how can you maintain any sort of momentum or growth when the person buying the paddle may never actually play in a USAPA pickleball event, or they may never play in a UPA event? And so is it worth that? And so what we did with UPA, PMA is we kind of took it in a community-based approach, which is if you want to become a member and you want to put a paddle out and you want to put a PMA stamp of approval on it, well, we'll kind of decide that on a community basis amongst paddle brands that are part of the membership in the community. In other words, if you're putting out a rocket ship that we think is going to hurt people, um, we're probably going to point that out and say we're not going to recommend or endorse your particular paddle. And instead of getting all this machinery, and you've made great paddles for years, and now we got to test you and we got to charge you X amount of dollars. We're like, let's bring in the people we've all worked with, all the people that they know that they've worked with, and let's do this communally. We can follow some set standards that are already out there, but do we have to charge people tens of thousands of dollars to, kind of get through that little gateway into a place where those people may never use those paddles in a setting where they have to get, have to have that stamp on it because the scheme of all the tournaments out there, very few of them are USAPA tournaments. Very few of them are UPA. There's tons of others that are available, and so that's kind of the idea between a PMA approved paddle is like, what about all the other stuff? Just rec play, open play, you name it, a league.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you and I would probably agree on this point too. If you take the average rec player, which I am, maybe a 3-5 on a good day, a 3-2
Yeah,
most days, Mike. And the reality is that I don't really care what's happening at pro pickleball. Like I'm aware of it. I know the name Ben Johns. I
yeah,
get all that, and I'll watch
yeah,
it. Excuse me, maybe out of the corner of my eye, but I'm not a diehard fan in that regard. And most of the people that I play with, I would say, fall into that bucket. They're interested.
yes,
Okay, I heard about this. Oh, they finally lost. They, we know who we're talking.
right,
But
right,
I don't
right,
think the average player coming in on a Monday morning, we're talking about the weather, the snow and the ice we had to scrape off our cars. We're not getting into a deep dive on the PPA and
right.
all of that. So yeah, I think that's an interesting thing.
And yet that influences us though, because if so and so's paddle cost let's say 15,000, $30,000 to get approved, that goes to the bottom line and they got to charge X, which rec players like you and I, now we're spending 200, 300, 350, $400 on paddles. When at the end of the day, if there wasn't a charge and we communally did this, they're starting off at a level where they're not 30 grand in the hole trying to get one model of their paddle lineup approved or whatever it happens to be. And so that's, I think you hit it on the nose. It's like there's a bunch of us out here. We're aware of pro ball, but you know, this is kind of about the people and the people making the decisions and the people creating the narrative. And that's really the whole idea behind my involvement with PMA is like, I just don't want these large entities to control the entire narrative. And then we just sort of get it filtered
Yeah,
down
we're
to
told
us.
what they want us to know, not what we need to know in some cases. So, yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting. Can
right.
I've as I mentioned out of the gate here, I've watched a lot of your online content and understand the Yurt that you're in
Yeah,
today is part of a larger community. How much of that community influence
right.
became part of PMA's backbone? Did the reality of how you're living become
Yeah,
part of your concept for PMA in any way?
yeah. Well, here's the thing, Mike. It seems like anything I do in my life, I always end up on the side pushing against the status quo. I mean, there's a reason I live in the middle of nowhere in a
Okay.
tent. Um,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
yes, and again, I took up pickleball, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I don't have to think about the world problems all the time. I can go to a place and we can just hit it around. And then you get involved, and then you're like, man, it's happening here too. There's a lot of stuff happening here where there's power struggles and people trying to greed kind of takes over, and I'm like. Yeah, even the sport I play with a wiffle ball, I'm on the other side trying to, you know, make some space for the little guy. I'm like, can't I just relax?
Chill out, everybody. Just chill out. It's pickleball. Calm down. Everybody take a
I
pill
know.
or do whatever you need to take to calm down, but calm down, please. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting.
Yes, but to answer your question is yes, we have a small community of people here that we can make decisions on because we know what's happening within the group. The group isn't so large where we're like, hey, what's going on here? We know what's going on because we can either feel the suffering of somebody or we can see it because it's in a small space with a small group of people. Obviously, if PMA grows, we'll have to get some things in that take care of those larger numbers. But ultimately, it's really sort of working with people that you've worked with for a while and trusted, and you know their you know their intent, and then you know that you don't want to be that person within that group that is disrupting that because you have all of a sudden gotten a little whatever greedy, anxious. You kind of want to play within the group and kind of build as we all go forward, and try and make this great for everyone because it's really about just letting you connect with other people. And if you're trying to do something where it's hurting those other people, then we don't want you part of that. So it's sort of I feel like the way it will work as we
Yeah.
grow.
Well, that's great. It's great insight, and I appreciate all of that, Mike. It's great stuff, and thanks for sharing all of that. Just glancing back at the notes that you had sent me, you're involved in hosting Ver TV. What's happening there? What's
Yeah.
the story behind that?
Yeah, so VAR is part of PMA. There is a rating system that is out there that is trying to sort of change the idea of how rating systems work. Obviously, Duper is sort of embedded into people's brains and mindsets, and um, Duper's had about 5 or 6 years to collect data on us. Now they're doing resets. They're charging people for resets. It just doesn't seem to be holding water the way everybody would hope that like a 4.5 is a 4.5 no matter who you are. I think that sounds great in principle, but at the end of the day, I think things like age, gender, adaptive pickleball. Are you playing with a 3.2 partner, or are you playing? Tons and endless variables. And so what VAR has done is brought in as many variables as they can into their algorithm. Plus, you have the option of getting visually rated by somebody who's been trained to rate you on a like a 41 point scale of all these different areas, and then you throw it into the algorithm with some AI looking at those numbers as well, and it spits out basically what your rating is. And so instead of you play a game, you play a bunch of matches, you throw in some scores, and you hope to see what your rating is. Ver's idea is like, we want to see what you look like. We want to see the decision making you make. We want to see the shot selection that you make. We want to see how good your shots are after you make that choice. And so I think ultimately that's sort of the way the game needs to go, and that's kind of the way technology is pushing us with with AI sort of coming into it. So the idea is having you can send in a video. You're playing, you play a bunch of matches, and somebody can evaluate you, or that you can have somebody come to you and evaluate you. Either way, and then they can tell you what you are, and what I think what's most important is they can tell you what you need to work on because of that scale of 41 different things. You can go, okay, maybe I'm not great in the mid court on my backhand side off the bounce, and that's what you work on. So I think it's more of a tool than what's already out there, where it's just spitting you out a number. It's nice to know, like, okay, how do I become? I'm a 4.1. How do I become a 4.5? And it shows you here's the areas where you're weak. Here's areas where you're excelling. Maybe in drilling, you don't have to work on these areas as much, and work on some of these where it's kind of keeping your
Yeah, it
rating
sounds great.
ultimately
It's
up.
interesting you mentioned AI. Where do you see it taking the game? What other areas of the game do you see it coming into in, let's say, the next couple of years? Because it's moving at a speed that I think is surprising even those of us that knew it was going to move pretty quickly. But it's moving even faster than that, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think what in Vera's kind of taken a lot of this on. I think scouting your opponents. There's an element in Vera where you can put in who you're playing that week, and if they're verified and all that, it'll look at their stuff, and it will actually spit out a scouting strategy of how to play this particular team with these particular people. I think also I think AI will be something that comes down to calling lines, not only at the pro level, which is desperately needed if you want to be taken seriously and you want to become an Olympic sport. You can't have people, calling their own lines. But I think at the amateur level, I see it where we're probably, going to be able to have some sort of devices on us, and I think part of this is happening already, where lines are being called by my watch, or there's some sort of thing in the paint or whatever it happens to be. Let serves, whatever it happens to be, maybe something with the ball, and tracking RPMs and stuff like that. I see it's really becoming kind of like gaming is, where there's all this data that we have, and it takes the data and organizes it in a way that is useful to us, depending on our personality. Obviously, some people are overwhelmed with the amount of data. Some people are really geeky and into that, and they want to know like everything they do and all their tendencies. I don't think we're that far away from sort of it being able to really pick our game apart and also sort of regulate it in a lot of ways on court.
It's interesting commentary, Mike. It really is because the old days, let's, 2 months ago,
Yeah,
the old days before AI
right.
came along. Yeah. When you stepped into a tournament, and I've done a few small tournaments, nothing just more local than anything,
Yeah,
but you'd get into a game with somebody you'd never met. And so it'd take you a couple of points to figure out, is Mike weak
right.
on the left hand, the backhand? How does he deal with the lob? What kind of drive does he have? But what you're telling me is AI is going to be able to give me that cheat sheet, if you will, against Bob and Joe that I know I'm facing off, this coming weekend.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was happening. So thank you. Interesting.
Yeah, that is fascinating to me too. Like you can literally get a scouting report on people, and obviously the more people that enter that their data, the more that will grow. And I think it happens fast, just like this sport took off fast. If it gets, this becomes something people want, then in a few years, everybody can go, oh, well, I'm going to play Mike. Let's get the little scouting report on him. Oh, body bang him up in the chest.
Yeah, he's weak. Well, mine would say you have nothing to worry about. That would be the AI would very quickly say, there's nothing here to think about. Nothing. He's got nothing. So he's weak, left, right, anything. Yeah. Start blowing kisses. If you
That's
blow
good.
kisses at him, it really upsets him. That part, you'd throw him right off his game. So, and listen, I love AI primarily because I have NI, which is no intelligence. So AI and I are
Right.
great
I
friends.
get it,
Like,
man.
listen, I struggled to get
Yeah.
through grade 12. I swear to God. Yeah, they kicked me out because they were tired of seeing me. So yeah, I did it the old fashioned way. I just went out and worked my guts out. So yeah, fascinating. Do
Yeah.
you think, final question on AI, because I'm fascinated by it and the game and you.
Sure.
So all three coming together in this question, but is it good for the game or bad for the game? Or can you answer it that simply?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I already miss sort of. I sort of actually I wish I would have found this game a little earlier because I sort of missed before the paddle technology explosion. Um, the way I sort of play and the way I like to play is I really like to play the soft game, and the advent of power and the amount of spin we can put on the ball now is somewhat ridiculous. I sort of wish I would have been playing, you know, even in the 90s when it was just
Mhm.
played in mostly gyms. Like my wife taught PE and she was teaching in
Oh, okay.
2003, and she'd tell me about it. And I thought, oh, that's a cute little adaptive game.
Yeah.
Actually, and then I think back, oh, if I would have taken this up in 2003.
Yeah, I know.
But at the same time, it's like one of those things too, where if I would have played back then, I would have been that guy going, "Oh, it sucks now. I hate all the technology." So, but I don't really know any difference. I came in and started playing in 2021 ish,
Yes.
and yeah, the technology was pretty good then already. So,
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, Steve Toronto, I mentioned earlier, it was his dad in
yeah,
1984. You know that story well, as many do, and coming home
yeah,
with those composite prototypes and really shifting the game in that moment into what we're seeing today.
yeah,
But well, listen, thanks for all of that. That was great. I mean, I love your insight into all of that, Mike. And it's
sure,
yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I think when we go to that social level, which we have mentioned earlier, is really where most of us or many of us plug into. Certainly, those hopefully listening to this are coming out of that camp. But if there's one thing that is, maybe a pickleball pain point, you mentioned line calls, and it is, for me at least, one of them. It's I don't mind the odd miss. We all make mistakes. I don't care what game you're in
yeah,
on a Tuesday morning. Somebody's going to call one out that was in, and vice versa. But boy, when you're up against a guy or a gal across the net that's just, it's just consistently, and it's a tough
right,
thing.
right,
And
right.
you hear
It
stories
is.
periodically about people jumping the net and beating the hell out of one another on the other side. Like, and
Right.
I don't advocate for that, but I'm not saying I haven't
No.
thought about it. I thought, come
Yeah.
on,
Oh yeah.
enough is enough. It's a
Yeah.
fair game, and I think there's some sportsmanship that's expected and anticipated. And I don't know if these people that do it consistently, and we know who we're talking about. We all have a few at our club.
Yeah.
It's are they just not seeing it, or they just really want to win that badly? And I can't answer that. I don't know.
Yeah. I can't answer that either. No.
Yeah, it's a tough call. Tell me about NCPA. Tell me about that. What's the story behind
Yeah.
that?
So I think obviously, junior, youth, collegiate pickleball is sort of the future. Those are the pipelines, and the National Collegiate Pickleball Association is one of them. I think there's three total organizations promoting and running collegiate pickleball, and I'm involved on the board with one of them. And that's really just kind of helping set up relationships, partnerships, because that's what I do. Like I mentioned earlier, I review products and I interview people in the industry, and so I have a lot of connections, and that's really my role there. But I think ultimately is really building the game from a youth level. I was out beginning of December in Arizona for an event, and it wasn't a college event. It was just kind of a semi-pro event, but there was this team that was from an academy in Tempe, Arizona,
Mm.
and it was all the kids looked like they were probably ages 12 to 14, and 5 foot nothing, 90 pounds, and like I was like, oh, whoa,
Yeah.
like this is what's coming. These kids had every move, every shot, every spin. I was like,
What's happening?
I felt bad about what kind of player I am. I'm like, I don't know if I should play this anymore. Like, is this what's coming?
Wow.
And I was like, I just couldn't take I was watching this kid. He must have been maybe 5 foot tall boy, maybe 100 pounds. Just, his bones aren't even developed yet. It
Yeah.
just he looked like a mini, Hayden Patrick, just running around, spin this way, spin that way, just toying with these guys who I've actually played against. Grown men who are in their 30s and 40s who are very good players, like high 4-0, low 5-0, and just making them look ridiculous.
Really? He just
And I was
chewed him
like,
up. Wow.
yeah. And so that's sort of what's coming, and I'm excited to work with organizations like that because it's fun to see where this game could be. I mean, I'm sure like any sport, when we look at the first 5, 6 years of the pro level of any game, and we look at it where it is now, 100 years later for some of these sports, we
Mm-hmm.
don't even recognize it.
Yeah.
And this sport seems to be on sort of steroids as far as how it's developing so fast, and it's a long way from being solved, but I imagine it's going to look sort of like table tennis shortly, where it's just these, just controlled spin, and you're like, how do you
Yeah.
even see the ball?
Well, it's true. And, even at the club level, at my level that I'm playing at, if there's a complaint from sort of my group that started just 3 years ago, to emphasize your point,
Yeah,
we're all complaining now because it was absolutely serve, return, drop, serve, return,
yeah,
predictable,
yeah,
expected. Now it's serve, return, gosh knows what's coming. And most of the newer players coming into our club and the demographic shifting downward. So we're seeing a slightly younger demographic, which is great. I'm all for that, but
right,
they're smashing
right,
everything. I mean, there is no
yeah,
third shot drop for most of these. And it is upsetting the social teacup. That's starting to wobble on the
sure,
saucer a little bit. And those that have been playing in this league for several years now, Mike, are not happy about it. And they're complaining. But
right,
who do you complain to? And what are you complaining about? It's a legal shot. Same
yeah,
with lobs. I mean, no, we've got
yeah, for
lobs.
sure,
You can debate the lob all day long. It's a legal shot. And against the right opponent, it's
yeah,
effective. So there's all these
yeah,
camps. And, I kind of get caught in the middle because I'm an advocate for the game growing and changing and adapting and adopting new
yep,
policies, rules,
yep,
and so on and so forth. It has to happen because I think if we look at pickleball compared to, say, golf or curling, legacy sports been around longer than time, we're still in diapers.
right,
I mean, we're a sport that is
absolutely,
literally wearing diapers. And so we have to expect change, and we have to be able to look at the technology and the rocket launchers that are coming out from all these paddle manufacturers, and we have to deal with it. So, yeah, it's a really
yeah,
fascinating conversation. But yeah, these young kids, and there's this age old debate in golf, who is the best golfer? Was it Jack Nicklaus or Tiger Woods? Well, you can't. I've never been able to support that argument. The technology, the
yeah,
equipment, the team around Tiger. I mean, there was Jack Barber in the car. I mean, and the kids in the back
right,
seat driving from Phoenix to wherever they were heading next. I mean, Tiger's got private jets and nutritionists and
yeah,
psychologists and trainers, and the equipment's tuned right to his exacting. So, I mean, a great golfer, no
right,
question. Was he the greatest in that moment?
yeah,
Sure. But was he the greatest
yeah,
against Jack? What will be fun is, what does pickleball do with that conversation down the road? How do we
yeah.
look at? Yeah,
Right, because we're going to look at the numbers. We're sort of in what I would call the Cy Young era of
right.
pickleball. Cy Young had
Yeah,
like 500 wins. Nobody's going to touch that. But he played in the
sure.
first, whatever part of the game.
Yeah,
Annalie Waters, nobody's going to break those records. Ben Johns, nobody's going to touch those records. Mainly because the depth of field isn't what it was.
no, yeah,
But that doesn't mean she's not fantastic, because my argument is she's top five guy in the world if she's a guy, and
yes.
she's not. So she could step up. She played, if her and Ben played men's doubles, I like their chances at least getting to the semis, if not the finals, often.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, Annika Sorenstam tried
Which
that.
makes the great sport great, because it's
Yeah.
obviously a sport where genders can really compete against one another.
Yeah, but it was to go back to golf. Annika Sorenstam tried that in the PGA. Came out of the LPGA and tried that
Right.
for a few events
Yeah.
just to test the waters and see how that went. So it'll be interesting to see if that
Right.
happens. Yeah, listen, I'm watching the clock, so I'm gonna be extremely careful and being careful of all of that. So thank
Oh,
you.
no worries.
Um, I talked to Jim Kloss yesterday. You might know the name Jim Kloss, but he was just
I do.
talking about how great she is and what a player. And so, there's a lot of people agreeing with what you just said. And yeah, we'll see what time does to that legacy, and it will be quite a
Yeah,
fascinating part of it. So yeah, thanks for all that. Love your insight. It was just great. Let,
absolutely.
let me step out of all of that, unless there was something else in that note that you had sent me that you really
No,
want to make sure we touch on. But here's a couple of sort of pickleball specific questions that I'd really like to get your opinion on. And one of them is, what do we do about difficult partners? We've all been in that game
right,
where, it's not going great. I'm having a bad day. Maybe my nutrition isn't great. I didn't focus on my sleep. It's a slightly competitive game. So I'm not talking about your social game, but let's just say a regional tournament, even, or a slightly more competitive game that you're in once in a while. But you've got a partner that's rolling their eyes, they're sighing. What, as a player, and I guess as a voice within the community today, Mike, how do you approach that? Because I think many of those listening right now will have experienced that difficult partner. What's the solution to
yeah.
that?
I don't know if there's a solution. I know my methodology is I generally tell people that at the end of the day, this is a wiffle ball game we're playing here. We do realize that, right? Like we are hitting literally a wiffle ball around and taking it probably a little way too seriously. And the second part is if something like that would continue, I'm like, I just don't have time for that. I don't have the time or energy. I've left groups of um, playing groups. A story that I can give you is private court, people inviting us, and people complaining about line calls and stuff like that. Da 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 da. And I was just like, I don't really need this in this group. There's plenty of other groups I can play in. There's too much bickering going on here in this group. And so I move on pretty quick because it's a big pool of people, a lot of opportunities, and life's too short for me to be having that sort of cortisol
Yeah.
rush over a wiffle ball
Yeah,
game.
it's so true. And it's no fun when a game shifts from 2-on-2 to 3-on-1. And that's fundamentally what happens in that
Yeah,
moment. I mean, I've had it where yeah,
right,
I am
exactly.
so worried about the guy next to me. I'm not even thinking about you and your partner across the net anymore. And it's a troublesome. But
Yeah,
the reason I ask that question is I'm seeking insight on that because a lot of the people I play with have brought that up to me. They've come up to me and said, Boy,
yeah,
Bob did it again today. He's back at it again today, and we got to deal with Bob." And nobody
right,
wants to
right.
deal with Bob, but somebody's got to figure out how to tell Bob what he's doing isn't helping. So yeah, appreciate your thoughts on
Right.
that. Final
Yeah.
question, before we wrap up, is your thoughts on the number of pickleballs being produced globally today. From what I've gathered, is somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 million across the globe.
Right.
How many of these are being pulled out of games? They're cracked, they're warped, they've gone soft. And I know at my club here locally, Kingston, Ontario, Canada, we don't have a recycling program. We've looked into it. My wife and I started the game about 3 years ago, and it was probably the first thing that really got under our skin. Listen, I love this game, and there's very little about the game I would ever complain about or be critical of.
Right.
But that's one point that really doesn't sit well with me. I don't see the ball manufacturers stepping up and offering a solution. I don't see the governments in our area stepping up. I don't see the clubs stepping up. Most of the balls that come out of play at our club are going in the trash can. So I talked to a kid out of Florida
Yeah.
yesterday named Dylan Rosenthal. He started a company called Bounce Back Pickle. He's collecting balls from
Yep.
hundreds of locations ultimately, and reproducing these back into pickleballs, which is fascinating. So he's not just grinding them down, and the remnants of that are being used for something else. He's actually creating pickleballs out of old
Yeah.
pickleballs. So where do you land on that? I
Right.
mean, you live in a yurt. Clearly, I get a sense, and again, because I know you so well, as
Yeah.
I said at the start, because I know you. We have an intimate relationship. I know you so well. You must
Right.
not be happy about this. Is my sense. I get a sense you're a good guy.
Yeah.
Where do you land on all of the sort of landfill material that we're creating as pickleball players each year?
Oh yeah, it's a nightmare. This whole sport's plastic. So yeah, I've interviewed people who too, like Dylan, who are doing different things, and I think those businesses will grow because there's opportunity there to create something that's useful and clearly needed. So I hope those types of individuals continue to pursue those areas, and there's more of them that come aboard. We use at our courts, one of the balls we use is a bio ball, and I think that's something that degrades a little faster than a standard ball in a landfill. But yeah, I'm with you. I think the ball needs to actually ultimately change, um, and not just obviously from the plastic which we talked about, but where to put it. But the noise. this is plastic on plastic sport, and as the infrastructure continues to grow in different communities and different housing developments, it's going to be hard if you got 16 courts next to you and people playing 6:30 in the morning, whacking these balls around. I can't imagine the noise level of that. So I do think there are things to work on in this game, and one of them is the ball. We put a lot of stress in sort of focus on paddles and what they're doing and how much spin they're creating and da 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 da. And I'm like, I think we could put more emphasis on the ball. It'd be a cheaper thing to work on. And ultimately, if we make the ball soft enough or malleable enough that the noise will drop and the paddle speed will also drop because the ball is a little mushier. I remember in PE when I was a kid, we weren't playing with a 12-inch hard softball. We'd have the rubber coated thing that would turn into an egg a little bit as he hit it because it slows the ball down. And we were spending all this money testing paddles and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hey, just make the ball mushier. Come on. And hey, make it something that we can actually use again. So I do think that's coming. I know there are people working on this very hard. And I look forward to that sort of happening because I think it's desperately needed in several
Yeah,
areas.
great point. Wasn't thinking about noise pollution, but that's there too, right? If you want to term it as such. And it's one of
Yeah.
those things, those of us that love the game certainly don't want 12 courts in our backyard on a Sunday morning.
No, yeah, I
We
get it.
don't.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in my yurt and all of a sudden I hear click, click, click,
Yeah.
click for 4 hours or
Yeah,
whatever.
no, it could go on all day, and I could see it being a real issue, and it has been certainly in our municipality, in our city here. It's about
Yeah,
to fire up again. The snow's melting. We're almost able to see the lawn again, and here we go. We're going to transition
right,
from the
right.
indoor club play to the outdoor, and I guarantee you, within the next 30 or 40 days, there's going to be some flare up somewhere, and somebody's going to bring it up, and away we go again for another season of it. So yeah, it's fascinating. Well, listen, this has been enlightening and encouraging, and it's been a real pleasure meeting you. What can we look forward to from you in the next
Likewise.
6 to 12 months? What's on the agenda, the radar that you can share with us, that those of us that are following you and excited by what you're doing and love your voice and love your honesty and all of this, what lies ahead for you in the next little bit?
Yeah, really, it's sort of three-prong approach. I work with obviously PMA, which we talked about, trying to build membership. It's free, trying to encourage people to just get in there and collaborate with one another. It's a form of marketing I think that we can all really use because it's cheap. You don't, like I mentioned, you don't have to spend money just to kind of share each other's posts and support each other's work. And potentially, obviously, if you have a paddle that you want approved and you don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars, this may be an approach to look at. Ver is kind of integrated in that, so I'll be working with Ver as well, trying to get a rating system embedded in our world that is makes sense, and we know what we have to work on in the areas with that we have to improve upon. And then the last thing is sort of the fun aspect of this. I promote pickleball cruises. I work for a company called Daily Travels, and if you want to take a cruise, jump on a boat, man, and hit some wiffle balls around on a ship.
I love it. Well, listen, your generosity in so many ways, Mike, is not it's not missed on me personally, and I don't think it's missed on the pickleball community. So I thank you for that. You give so much. And even this, I mean, when I reached out to you, full disclosure, I didn't expect to hear back from you. And not because I had an opinion of you, just
Ah,
because here I am. I haven't even launched the podcast yet. I promised myself 15 episodes would be done, polished, and ready to go because I needed to buy some runway ahead of this. I think I have an appreciation for the amount of work it's going to take. And I certainly have understood that better in the last month or so. But for you to have gotten back to me and agreed to be here today, I think just reminds me of why I love this game. It's people like you, and
yes.
we're just everywhere. And, to be able to talk to someone like you, basically creeped you out on the internet and tracked you down. And here we are today
Yeah,
chatting.
you're very good at this, by the way.
Wow.
You have the voice for it, you have the patience for it, and you don't do what I'm doing right now, talking over someone. But I think you have a pretty bright future in this. You're very good. You're a
You're
natural.
too kind. You're too kind. But I think it comes from a position of passion. It really does. I love this game immensely, and I love the people. And you'll often hear me say, if we bump into one another, boy, I sure like the game, but I love the people. And I think if you come at life from that
Yeah,
perspective, and we've always drilled that into our two boys, Mike, it's honesty and integrity. We're paramount in raising
yeah,
them. And I think, part of the game that I'm worried about a little bit is that we're getting away from some of that with some of the things that you've mentioned. I just hope we hang on. I just hope it's such a great game. And it started in earnest. It started for all the right reasons because the kids were driving them crazy on Bainbridge Island. And,
yeah,
if you think back to
yeah,
those
yeah.
moments and you see where we are today and the battles that were happening in the film that you're involved in, the storyline behind all of that, please, let's just not lose it because it's the greatest game in the world. It
Right.
really is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's bring it back to the people because that's what it's really about at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
We
So 100%
You've
with
been
you.
great. Well, thanks for this. I appreciate all your time, and I really appreciate your kind words. Thank you.
Absolutely.